Hey guys, we're on episode 2 of Ask Yourself, Digging into Fear.
Ask Yourself is a learning discussion where we seek questions to be more intentional about how we understand ourselves. We are two friends who are trying to make sense of ourselves and the world together.
Yeah, I'm Nina Guno. I write news stories and I love learning, I love asking questions and recognizing our shared humanity.
And I'm Elisha Corpus. I consult with companies and individuals on culture transformation. This is really where my curiosity for behavior and mindset changes comes from.
How are you, Elijah? In week
You're just
whatever
really
of...
going for it, huh? Big question. Okay, well, since you started asking me, let's see. We are on day 52 of the quarantine, I believe. And I think for me, I find that I'm even busier now compared to all the other weeks of the quarantine. And I think it's because a lot of the companies and individuals I work with, they've really started to adapt and figure out how they will deal with this, work from home, virtual arrangement. Like, for example, now I have more virtual trainings because people know how to use their Zooms, their Microsoft Teams, and they're trying to explore that possibility given the reality that, even when we get to the GCQ, there are no trainings or conferences allowed. So
Oh,
I think people are dealing with that reality and starting to live with it. And I think for me, even though it's busy, there's some good there because we're starting to adapt to this new reality, and it's hard. Like, it's so hard, especially for a lot of people who are not used to virtual work and what's happening. It's hard to be productive and deal with that and deal with everything else. But I think it's a good sign that I'm busy because it means we're trying to adapt at least.
yeah,
And we're very resilient people. We're trying to get what we need to get done
yeah.
and dealing with it, I think. Yeah, so that's where I'm at now. How about for you?
I think I'm also adjusting more to working from home.
Mhm.
It's tough. Like it does get
Yeah.
tiring, even without the long commutes, or even if you're just at home.
Mhm.
But also in my dream world, the past few nights I've been dreaming about me out in crowds, out with friends, out with family,
Oh.
as in restaurants, just in big gatherings where there's no physical distancing. So I guess there's still that feeling of missing that sense of company, missing that option
Mhm.
to be out
Mhm.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a choice. The Having the choice to go out, I think that's what I miss. Because even before, like, I enjoyed going out, but I didn't do it every single week.
Yeah.
But I think it was knowing that I could go to the bar with my friends if I wanted to. I could do something fun outside of my house. That's what I'm missing. That ability to be able to do it and to choose
Yeah.
it.
That loss of control. Like we just don't have that control
Yeah.
anymore. And a lot of things are uncertain now, which is also leads into our topic that uncertainty causes fear. So it causes a
Mhm.
lot of feelings, but one of those things is fear. And we've seen that manifest in some recent news
Mhm.
stories of police violence. So if it's okay, I'll just get into those stories just to remind listeners of why we're even talking about this in the first place.
Yeah, that'll be really, really helpful because I think also there's an air of uncertainty already,
Mhm.
right? Like what we mentioned, even in the way we behave, the way we have fun, there's so much uncertainty there. And then you add in news like what you will be talking about, and that will just pile up and give us even more uncertainty, which I think makes sense that we're all scared and we're all reacting to that, like, scaredness.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
okay. Maybe catch us up a little bit, and you're the better person to go through the news.
okay. So just to lay down the facts of what happened. Just a few weeks ago, April 21, April 27, there were
It's
two.
been a few weeks pa lang.
It
For
has
real.
been, yeah. But there's a lot has happened. But in those two incidents, there were police confrontations or police altercations. And in April 21, we saw that a former army soldier, retired army soldier, was shot in broad daylight. And why? Because he was out during the enhanced community quarantine. We're not supposed to be unless you're an essential worker. But in his case, there were cops surrounding him. I guess they couldn't understand his behavior also. And apparently, one of them, or they thought that he had a gun and was going to shoot at them. And that's why he was shot. But adding to the anger and I guess the grief also surrounding the situation was that he had mental illness. He had PTSD. So there were a lot of reactions about that in the days that followed. And then not shortly after that, April 27, there was an incident this time between a Spanish man in his own home in an exclusive subdivision or village. And the video that came out that day was that he was on the ground, tackled to the ground, trying to be handcuffed by an officer. So seeing that video for me was alarming, especially after the Winston Ragos case. But after that video came out, there was also another video which showed him, the Spanish man, berating the officer, being well, he was cursing, he was being rude towards him. And it was just over the fact that the officer was saying your house help who was watering the plants outside didn't have a face mask on, and there's a fine for that, a 1,000 peso fine for that. So there was just a lot of tension, a lot of emotions that flared up, I guess, in these incidents, and it made me think about how we can better react, given this whole era of uncertainty, given all the fear that we already have with the coronavirus. Yeah.
Yeah. That last bit you just said, right? About it made you think about how you react to fear. I think that's really the key here of why we even chose this topic in the first place, right? Like it's so hard to understand fear and what it is and what's going on, because how do you even start to understand something when you're not sure of what that something is, or you're
Yeah.
not sure of what's happening? And I think it might be helpful if we dig into like what are knee-jerk reactions
Right.
and what that looks like. And I can go first because I think when we see something and it can be fearful, we have this immediate knee-jerk reaction that it just happens without you even thinking about it. And for me, when I saw the news about those two incidents, my knee-jerk reaction was more around disbelief,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many I mean, these are big problems for sure, not invalidating them or anything like that, but there there are bigger problems right now, like this pandemic that the whole world is facing, and then you're going to add incidents like that. And so in my head, like, what, how does that make sense? And so there's a lot of disbelief there. And then adding to that, like once I saw all the posts and all the comments and everything on social media, then my knee-jerk reaction was more around worry, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the reactions that even friends had, even people I personally knew, they were so just based on purely emotion. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with emotions, right? Like there's lots of good actions that can come from our emotions. But I think what worried me was seeing how people didn't really stop to think about both sides. It was just like everyone just started to find someone to blame, or a party, a group, an institution to blame. And and that worried me a lot, because then it started me to I started thinking about, wait, is this how we judge each other? Like, is this how I'm being judged when I say something? Is this really how we treat each other? And so my knee jerk reaction became like, I'm worried. And that's why this is really helping me now that we're digging into it. So maybe it might be helpful if you give us another example. Like, what was your knee jerk reaction to these things?
It was similar to that also, just really shocked. And I guess also trying to find someone to blame, just to
Mm-hmm.
see who was wrong here, and maybe even thinking about how can I not be in that situation, or how could I
Right.
react better in that
Mm-hmm.
situation. So I think that's why we're also here, because we want to be more mindful of how we
Yeah.
act or react to fear.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing, right? Like, we can all be talking about it. We can all be like trying to watch the videos and figuring it out as best as our untrained eyes can figure it out. But there's something there about finding someone to blame, because
Mm-hmm.
we're all trying to find an explanation. And there's this concept, we call it dissonance. So our brains do not like dissonance,
Mm.
because when dissonance is happening in your brain, it's like many opposing ideas are all existing, and your brain doesn't like that because it's getting confused. And so
Mm-hmm.
our brains want an explanation for everything. I guess that's also why like people like closure, you know. Anyway,
Yeah.
different topic, different day, but it's I, that's the idea of dissonance. We hate it, and so we try to find an explanation to get rid of the dissonance. And I think that's what was happening, because if you find someone to blame, then your brain will have a story. Then it's not so confused.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. But on that note, since we're not the ones in danger, like like right there in that moment. So I'm just wondering how we can be more mindful of how we react in that case that okay, we're behind our keyboards and we can say this or that. So how can we be more mindful and not unnecessarily spread more fear? Yeah. Maybe we can take
There
a look
might
at.
be, yeah, there might be something there. Because, right, you said something like, yeah, we're behind our keyboards.
Okay.
There's something about contextualizing,
Oh, okay.
like where you are now, and where are you when you're experiencing that fearful thing, or that fearful
Mm,
reaction. Yeah, because I contextualizing is more of you're observing what's going on. Where am I? Who's around me? It's
mm,
like naming the facts,
okay.
naming what's around you, your surroundings. There may be something there about contextualizing, because the way I'm starting to see it, or the way at least I see it now, is our bigger context is uncertainty, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, COVID-19, global. If our bigger context is already uncertainty, then it might help to know that and to recognize that, so that when we are in that situation that's fear inducing, we can look at it from that context
Okay.
and know that, okay, well, I already know that I'm scared of everything that's happening. How is this making me more scared? Is that why I'm reacting to it this way? So maybe there's something there. Should we sound the imaginary
Yeah. I
question
think
alarm?
that that could be a question. What is my context right now? Right? What is going on right now in my reality at this moment?
Yeah.
So maybe it could be a way to be more mindful, or to make you pause
Mhm.
before you react.
Ooh, okay. We should get a little bell, a
Yeah,
question
okay.
bell.
So I'll make a note of that. What is my context?
Yeah, and I do like that question, because it leads us to a better understanding of, you're afraid because of something.
Mm.
which means that you're just reacting to something, and it doesn't make it a, a bad thing that you're feeling fear. Because I think that's one of the things that we said we wanted to make sure to point out, that fear isn't a bad thing.
Right.
It's
It's an emotion.
yeah. So in terms of definitions, right? Like if we were to define fear, it's an emotion, and as we all know, like emotions are all valid. It's
Yeah.
not a good thing or a bad thing to be
Yes.
sad or happy or whatever that is. Ooh, which makes me remember, if fear is an emotion, that means our reactions to that emotion must be coming from something, right? It's tied to like physiological and brain
Yeah.
processes.
Maybe you can take us through that because you're the one with a psych background. So what's going on in our brains when we're afraid?
Yeah, so there's this idea, and I actually got this from his name is David Rock. So he's a CEO of Neuro Leadership Institute, and
Mm.
the good thing is I actually worked with that firm in
Wow.
my previous job in another, what feels like another life. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll share a little bit about what I know from there, because our brain, according to what I learned there, is we have a threat and a reward system. And so our brains are just constantly scanning for threats, because that's how we survive, right? Like if we think about our ancestors, I'm trying to think of Homo blank.
Yeah, and the
I should have
Neanderthals
looked it
back
up.
in the Ice Age.
Yeah. So if we think about like our ancestors in the past, they've been able to survive because they avoided the threats.
Mm.
Because their brains helped them to know, like, oh, don't eat that plant. Death, don't go near that animal. Death. And so our
Okay.
brains our brains grew or developed to know what's a threat and not. Like I think what I read was our brains process about 11 million pieces of information per second, and that's not even consciously.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
even if we're not conscious, our brain is trying to analyze, okay, what's death, what's scary,
Okay.
what's something we should be avoiding. And so I think that's where a lot of the automatic responses to fear come from, because we just feel it.
What are those responses? Like fight or flight?
Yeah,
Are
so
those?
there's more actually. So right,
Oh.
fight, flight, there's freeze, and about, I'm not sure if this is new, but for me, I only heard it like 3 years ago. There's flock. So
Mm-hmm.
flock is more of, if I'm scared, then I'll just look for other people to be scared with. It's
Oh,
comforting to know
okay.
that other people feel it. So
Yeah.
these these are automatic reactions to threat, and that happens. It might be useful to go through like what happens in the brain, even though it's
Yeah.
a little sciencey, because what, at least in some of the trainings that we teach for managers, we say that the more you know what's going on inside you, in your brains, then the more we start normalizing these things. The more we demystify it, then we can understand how to
Mm-hmm.
react to it. So maybe we'll talk about that a bit.
Yeah. So what goes on in your brain? Like there's a whole process going on that we're not even aware of. And I
Yeah.
guess to label it, it'll also help us control what's going
hmm
on.
hmm Yeah, and so the thing with emotions is it's something that gets processed without our rational thinking necessarily.
Oh,
And so
okay.
the different signals in our body, for example, it goes to our amygdala, which is at the base of your brain. So it's like at
Mm,
the bottom near your spine. And your amygdala, that's what tells you to respond automatically. So that's what tells us to, like, okay, you gotta run
okay.
now, or it tells us to, okay, get ready to fight. It sends like that oxygen in your blood, so you're ready to like swing your arm or move your legs because you gotta run away. And it's there at the base because you have to act fast, right? And
Mm-hmm.
rightly so. Like if there's a dinosaur, I'm not sure if our ancestors interacted with dinosaurs.
How do you become mammoth? I would think. Just
Yeah,
looking at the
okay.
Ice Age movies.
So if there's like a scary animal, you run away.
Yeah.
But I think if we contextualize that now, there's not a lot of scary animals that we see. And what's happening is, even in our modern world, our brains are still structured that way.
We're still stuck with
Right?
those reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing because there are times when you do have to act fast. Like if you're walking down a dark alleyway and, there are quote unquote sketchy things. I mean, we need those reactions.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking, like, for example, I am afraid of heights. And even if I'm in a safe place, like a building where it's really secure, I'm still scared of heights, and I still have those reactions. I would think that it's something that can be very bothersome and could make a person or myself act irrationally or not in a way that really suits the current situation. So I guess, how do we identify that we are afraid so that we can act on it in a way that is really mindful or
Yeah, we'll see.
intentional?
In that example you gave, for example, right? In that example, for
Yeah.
example, like you're scared of heights. But
Yeah.
in that moment, do you notice what's going on in you? No, right? Like you're just focused on, oh my god, it's
I'm
really,
gonna,
really
yeah,
high.
I'm gonna die. Like, just me looking down. Even if I'm not, I'm gonna die.
But see, that's the thing. Like, one of the things that at least we recommend in some of our trainings is you have to label your physical reactions to these things,
Oh,
because
okay.
the more you know, then the more you can identify that in this moment I am scared.
Okay,
And
okay.
so, I like, for you, for example, when you're there and it's really high, what happens in you?
Feel like I'm trembling, my palms are sweaty, or my jaw clenches. But that same reaction happens, like, even when I'm scared, like, to talk in front of a crowd.
Mhm.
It's like there's those same physical or physiological
Mhm.
manifestations. Yeah.
Yeah, and same for me. Like when I'm really scared, like my hands get really sweaty to the point sometimes, like when there's even anxiety involved, like they get really weirdly like chubby and it's hard to move them. It's so
Okay.
embarrassing when you have to shake hands with people. But yeah, I think it's those physiological manifestations that we have to pay attention to because, like
Mm-hmm.
what you said, whether you're in front of a really high, well, you're there in a really high level, or whether you're in a different situation, it could be the same reaction. And if we label it, then at least it gives us a little clue that, okay, maybe I'm scared right now.
Okay. Can we make that one of our questions then? What
Ooh,
are the
you're sounding the
signs?
alarm.
Yeah, non-existent alarm. But yeah, what are the signs that you're afraid? So I guess for anyone listening, you can think of the physical reactions that your body has, and that could clue you in that, oh, I'm afraid right now, and therefore I should be mindful of what my next steps are. If I'm gonna
Yeah,
be
yeah,
acting
yeah.
on fear,
Mhm.
yeah,
Then at
and
least you know that you're acting on fear.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
will also make you think about, like, okay, since I'm afraid, it's my amygdala right now that's working, not really
Mm-hmm.
the rational part of my brain. Like,
Yeah.
it's, well, I don't know what it's called. What's the one in the front?
Oh, prefrontal cortex.
Okay, yeah. So like, yeah, in those situations where your life isn't really in danger, you want that prefrontal cortex to be the one working, right? So how do we get to that?
Well, I think that question that we just identified, right? Like, what are the signs that I'm scared? That
Mm-hmm.
gives you an intentional pause. Because
Okay.
sometimes all you need really are a few seconds. Let the information let those signals go from your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex. And
Oh, okay.
then you can process the information. But I think what happens to a lot of us is, even though, let's say for example, it's a really high level, but girl, you know that there's glass and the chances of
Yeah,
the glass breaking and you falling are very, very slim. And
yeah.
so you have to process that in your prefrontal cortex. But
Okay.
it's not going to get there if all you're
You
thinking
don't give
about
it
is,
time.
oh my God, hi,
Yeah.
hi.
Right. So you gotta give your brain time. And it's just a few seconds, like you said, right? Wow. Okay. And I also want to bring up something that I've learned. And I think I also relate more to this as somebody who's a writer.
Hmm.
But fear is really storytelling. And I like hearing this from an author. Her name is Karen Thompson Walker. And she was saying that what's amazing about fear is that it's our imagination that's really at play. So if you're like me, you can imagine all these scenarios, or like any other human being, you can imagine all these scenarios going on when you're afraid, all the worst case scenarios that could happen, which is great if you really are in danger, but also it's not it's not very convenient if you aren't, right? You're in the modern world where generally things are pretty safe. So she was also saying that since we are the storytellers through our fears, we can also read these stories. So you can actually choose, like choose your own adventure. You can go with your really worst fear, worst case scenario, or you can go with the other options, which might be more realistic to that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that because it's sort of like you're acknowledging that maybe fear is becoming my lens in
Mm,
terms of how I'm viewing the world. And so,
okay.
knowing that I'm using my fear as the lens, then I can write my own story and my own narrative to
Ooh.
interpret that. So, in coaching, in the coaching world, there's this idea called the narrative coaching. And what we try to encourage there is to have people tell their stories of the situation they experienced. Because,
Ooh.
right, like let's say you and me, we attend the same concert. Oof, the same concert, right? But my story of it is going to be different from your story of it because we
Yeah,
have
for
different
sure.
perceptions, we have different ideas, we have different upbringings, beliefs, values. And so the stories we tell, that not only is influenced by the things we already know, but it influences the things we will know and will do. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the power of acknowledging, like, what lens are you viewing the world from, and how are you interpreting that lens. So that's why I love that idea of fear. There's storytelling involved there.
Yeah, so I think we can also make it a question, right? Like, what lens are we
Ding
looking
ding
at
ding.
to our fear? Or maybe to make it more concrete, but for me, it really helped to think of it as a story. So, what stories am I telling about my fear?
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, because then if you already have that story, I'm guessing stories are very powerful things that get stored in our brains. And these
mhm.
are things that we can pull up for maybe the next time that we experience that kind of fear. I don't know if Karen said something about that.
She said something about how those stories, like thinking of those different scenarios, you can actually prepare. It can help you prepare for those scenarios. So in a way, it's also a productive way of looking at your fear. Like when after you've acknowledged, after you know you're afraid, you're acknowledging it on what your, I guess what your context is also with that fear. Then you see the different scenarios. You can also then prepare for what's gonna happen next. Yeah.
Okay, I guess that makes sense because looking at those trainings that I mentioned earlier, it helps to bring in role playing into
Mm.
those workshops. And because the value of role playing, even though they're not really very good actors, or even though it's not actual scenarios, then sometimes you can pull like guide questions, or you can pull
Oh,
sample sentences or sample ways of how to navigate
yeah,
conversations. So then when you're faced with something similar, you have that bank of questions and sample phrases, sample words in your head that you
yeah.
can pull up for the next time.
Wow. Yeah, that's one way to look at it, right?
More sense
So, mhm, I guess we can sum up what we've been talking about.
so far. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've gone through what the stages that I guess I kind of see what I'm seeing also is that there are stages to process your fear. So so that you could also let your amygdala rest and um kind of get to a more rational space. Yeah, so maybe we can review what we've gone through.
Okay, so I think first we said that there's something here about acknowledging that the bigger context we're going through is
Mm,
uncertainty. And so there's something there about contextualizing where you are, that and doing that through observing. Where am I located? Who are the people around me? What is the situation? What's going on? And so contextualizing helps give you like a realistic view, I guess, of that fearful situation, so that you can then make your reactions kind of appropriate for whatever that context is.
yep,
Okay. Then number two is we also talked about acknowledging that there are physiological manifestations of fear, and then maybe if we notice those, then it can cue us into like, okay, I am scared now, because these happen even before you realize that you're afraid.
yeah, yeah. So it's important to be tuned to your own physical reactions because they give you a clue to what you're feeling. And yeah, your feelings, I remember hearing this or something, your feelings don't lie. So they're valid. So what matters is that we don't want to block them, we don't want to stop them. We want to control how we react to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So building on that, because our third is related to that, I think your
Yeah.
feelings don't lie, but you lie. And so,
Right.
right? And so
Your
it's up to
imagination
you,
lies.
right? And so it's up to you to like tell that story. Are you gonna lie to yourself?
Yes.
Or is your story going to be a real story?
Yeah, something that is hopefully, well, preferably factually based. Although we also want to acknowledge that, yeah, there are situations where you have to really think fast and all that. But actually, I'm also thinking if you are able to prepare ahead of time and you're faced with a situation where you have to think or act fast, then going through these steps or thought process could help you still manage how you react. And in a way that is not harmful to others, not harmful to yourself either.
Yeah. So it's sort of like that idea of practicing, right? Like you sort of practice your brain so
Yeah.
that it can react faster and more accurately and more appropriately the next time it's afraid, or the next time you're
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also going through these steps, knowing that the physical manifestations of fear, knowing your context, thinking about the stories that we tell when we're afraid, it can also make you think about how other people act when they're afraid, and
Right.
you can also respond to them better in that way. So it kind of brings more empathy, I would think.
Yeah. Which makes sense, because the more you understand yourself
Mm,
and how you experience fear, then maybe the more attuned you will be to the other people's responses to fear.
right.
I think that's a good point, because I bring that up because right, last 2 weeks ago we talked about bayanihan and how
Mm,
bayanihan is really, it emphasizes our connections with each other. I think what's happening is when we're scared and when we're just reacting to our fear, we can forget that we are connected to each other. And even though I'm scared, look, the other person is also probably scared because you're
Yes.
connected. But
Yeah.
but when we don't really think about the situation, we forget that. So we forget our connections, which is
Yeah,
really
I,
sad.
I think also we really shouldn't be afraid of each other. And that's hard to remember when you are in that moment that you feel threatened. But yeah, we shouldn't be afraid of each other. I guess what we should be more afraid of, or at least think more about, is that how fear can control us if we don't think about it,
I
which is
guess
what,
there's some. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah, just to emphasize, just to go back to that, we want to be more intentional, which is the whole goal of ask yourself.
Right. There's something there about like our short-term reaction to fear versus the
Oh,
long-term reaction, because I'm seeing now like our knee-jerk reactions can be that short-term, but
okay.
we talk about connection and empathy and trying to see both sides. That thing takes time. Like that takes a
Mm,
lot of time, a lot of rational thought, a lot of getting different information to add to your context.
yeah.
And so I think part of being intentional, right? Like what you just mentioned, is it pays to think about your fear so that you can have a more long-term beneficially long-term reaction to it. Does that make
That's
sense? Because
true.
what I'm starting to see here is when we just keep on reacting and saying, "Oh my, you're wrong," like, no, it's this party that should be blamed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, we want to ask for accountability, but also there's a more nuanced understanding of this that will help us in the long run to be
Yeah.
better people, to be better at our connections. But we don't see that when it's all the knee jerk reactions that kick in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
That's
so
true.
I love this point about how these questions, or not even these specific questions, but questions like these that are making us intentionally think about fear, they can really push you to think outside of yourself and think of outside of
Yeah.
that moment.
Yep. Yeah, that's the long-term goal here. It's like really to bring more of a sense of community, especially in these very uncertain times, where everyone is just, we don't know what's gonna happen next, honestly. But yeah, there are a lot of things out of our control, but we can control how we react to
Mm-hmm.
our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can control our fear, right? Or at least be intentional about it so we can choose what to do about it.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Wait, are we at a good time to summarize our three questions?
Yep,
Have we
we
reached the
are.
major bell?
Yes. Okay. So we can go back and just review
Okay.
what we've been talking about. So again, what we want to do is ask ourselves some questions that we can be more mindful of our fear and how we react to fear. First is, what are the signs that you're afraid? So acknowledging that in the first place you're afraid and it's manifesting physically in your body. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the next one is what is my context, which helps you after you acknowledge what's happening in your body, in your physicality, then you look at, well, what is this in the context of where I'm at, or in the context of my situation? Is this an appropriate response to
Mhm.
where I am and what I'm seeing?
Right. And you go also into the different scenarios playing in your head. So what stories am I telling myself? And from there you can kind of pick out what's realistic here, and what is maybe an exaggeration, and maybe I shouldn't act on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so number one, what are the signs that I'm afraid? Number two, what is my context? And then number three, what stories am I telling myself about my fear?
Okay.
We got the
Yay!
three! Yay!
So
Well,
questions to ask yourself when you're afraid. Yeah.
yeah. And I know for myself these are things that I would want to find time to think about, especially in the next few days as we hopefully get into the last days of ECQ.
Hopefully. Yeah.
But yeah, maybe hopefully these are things that the people listening in can also find time to think about and reflect on.
Yep. For sure.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I'm really thankful to anyone who was listening. Like, thank you for letting us pick our brains, each other's brains, and talk about this topic. Especially now that we're just very alarmed and very concerned with what's happening around us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for taking this time to learn. Because really, you could be doing a lot of other things on during your time, but you took the time to invest in your own growth and your own development. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to learn with us and for asking yourself the hard stuff.
Yeah, thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.